Hello, Flanny friends. Spoilers, it really doesn't. They are still a deeply troubled person, but we can touch on that later, as instead, let's take a look at DC's $220 million reset button, The Flash. While technically Aquaman 2 is the final movie of the current DCEU, this is essentially the way that DC wants to start fresh while still keeping what they want from the original. Just at this point, we don't know what exactly they're going to keep from it. All we know is that sadly the big three of Henry Cavill, Gal Gadot, and Ben Affleck are out, but we're still a ways away from knowing what the ramifications of this movie, or more importantly, what the studio's decisions will be. But rather than worry about the future, let's take a note from The Flash and check in on the past. Before we get into it, as always, if you want to stay up to date on all the latest news and reviews, please consider liking and subscribing. Let's fix the timeline and make Flanny Files the most subscribed channel on YouTube, as it clearly always should have been. I can wish at least. Now, let's get on to it. Where do I even start with this? I guess we'll start with the main character and work our way through the chaos that unfolds in this movie. As always, spoilers ahead, you have been warned. Seems like multiverse is the hot topic lately, doesn't it? No Way Home did it beautifully, Doctor Strange a little bit clunkily, Across the Spider-Verse masterfully, Flash chaotically. Maybe the secret to the multiverse is Spider-Man. I believe it. Either way, we get to see what the DC multiverse is like, with Barry Allen going back to undo the event that changed his life forever. This is, of course, a take on the Flashpoint paradox from the comics, and done really well in animated form by DC. Which, for the record, if you're a DC fan and haven't checked out their animated collection, you're doing yourself a disservice. Now then, how is Ezra Miller's The Flash? Honestly, they're okay. I don't know if it was direction they were given, or if it was all set up for the realization that they can be rather annoying later on, but I don't really know if this version of The Flash could really hold up their own movie. There are many points where I was rolling my eyes at the way they acted rather than laughing at what the movie was going for. That being said, when it came to the emotional scenes and the actual heart of the movie itself, I think they did really good and for that I have got to give them props. The other thing I have to give them credit for is doing a really good job playing off themselves as Barry 2, or younger Barry. Yeah, it can get kind of confusing, but they did a really good job and a convincing job acting off themselves, which I cannot imagine is an easy task in and of itself. Does that make me forget their many crimes? Nope, not even a little bit. But still, credit where credit is due. Their struggle is also one that I think a lot of us can relate to. If we had the power to undo a tragedy in our lives, wouldn't we want to try to undo it? To try and fix a part of our past that we most regret or that impacted us the most? It is that humanity and that aspect of The Flash that I really enjoy, and we do get to see that shine here, albeit probably not as much as I would have liked. Because while this is a Flash movie, it's probably not the best movie to really establish as a standalone film, because there's a lot of heavy lifting done by the other major star in this. And yes, of course, I am talking about Michael Keaton's Batman.
I'm Batman.
While I think the applause was still much louder to see Tobey in No Way Home, there was no denying the joy of seeing him back in the cowl once again. It's just a shame that what should have been the best portions of that time were instead replaced by a PS3-era video game sequence, because I'll be honest, Arkham City still looks better than this. Keaton does well to ground the movie, and his stoic and calm demeanor helps to curb some of the more grating aspects of Ezra Miller's take on Barry Allen. So for that, I will be eternally grateful. And while we do see a lot of Keaton in the trailers, he never overtakes the film, which I think is good. But it's still hard to call this a standalone Flash movie because Keaton is in it a good chunk. And while it is good to see him in the cowl, I don't know if I'm sold on him being Bruce Wayne and that timeline is just wibbly-wobbly. In the original Flashpoint paradox, it was an older Batman, but that was because in that timeline it was Thomas Wayne, Bruce's father, who became Batman after his son was murdered that night in Crime Alley. And the ending had Flash taking a note back from Thomas to his son in the main DC timeline, and it just felt good. This really lessened that for me, and it's one of the lesser things in this movie, to be sure. But Thomas Wayne to Bruce Wayne wasn't the only change we got, because instead of a skinny Superman, we get an angry Supergirl played by Sasha Calle. And she's an angrier version of what we got in the original Flashpoint, even if their origins are fairly similar. Kept captive and away from sunlight, they don't get their powers until they are freed and able to absorb the light for the first time, and go on a mini killing spree. She goes from angry to helpful, and then just sort of ends her storyline there. There felt like there should have been more as we spent the second act looking for her and recruiting her for the fight against Zod. And even so, I will say what time she did get was a highlight. And I'm sort of sad to see that she has not been cast in the Supergirl film yet. Maybe fan reaction will be strong enough they decide to give her a go, because she did do really good for me. I thought that she could really pull off this version of Supergirl, so I'm curious to see if they go forward with her. Now then, that's the big lineup, but let's take a look at what makes up the centerpiece of this movie: immutable events, or canon events if you watch Across the Spider-Verse, and honestly done better there. We have our battle with Zod, and in it is when our original Barry realizes that some things are just meant to happen. Be it a death of a loved one, or the onslaught of a genocidal maniac, some things just have to happen. It is well done in this, but it's also just overburdened with an abundance of bad CGI. I feel like I owe an apology to Ant-Man and Quantumania for harking on its CGI, because this CGI is just really, really bad, which saddens me because a lot of the ideas are really, really good. The way the characters move, the way they fight are very cinematic and very much fitting for heroes of this caliber and their iconic comic book awesomeness. It's just a shame that the CGI wasn't able to deliver on these scenes and instead seems to turn them into horrific and cartoony representations of themselves. I don't know if the budget wasn't there, if the artists weren't allowed enough time. As we know, overworked and underpaid is unfortunately the reality for many of the CGI artists nowadays, but it turns what should be a really engaging and crowd-pleasing moment into something which more than one person laughed at during my viewing. The final thing I'll touch on, and very slightly, is the onslaught of cameos. I don't want to ruin them here, I really don't. Some are done in honor of a legacy that came before, and some are done to show what might have been. Even in the finale, there's a cameo that I'm sure no one was expecting. It's just, once again, for some reason, a large portion of these cameos were done with visual effects, which in some cases, the actors have passed. But if you're going to try to do something to honor them, don't do it like this. Don't parade around an animated corpse of what they once were. Even more baffling are the actors that are still alive that were done the same way, even though I know some of them would have jumped at the chance to don the suit. So, overall, what do I think? I think it's an okay film. It has a lot going on, and in the end, it's a bit frustrating. It has some amazing highs and just tremendous lows, some really impactful scenes, and some that are already slipping from memory. Much like its lead actor, it's a bit of a chaotic mess. Still, most people seem pleased with it by the time the credits ended, and I would still prefer to watch this than, say, Wonder Woman 1984 again. So definitely not the worst thing DC has put out, but also far from the best. Thing is, we're going to have to wait and see just what the ramifications of this are and who we're going to get going forward. That's all I have for now. What were your thoughts if you've seen it? And what did you think of the original Flashpoint Paradox? Until next time, guys. Bye!